Welcome back into the Cannes 2023 Parallel Challenge here on Fantasy Film Ball. We are your hosts, Matt and Arnaud.
That means we are watching an equivalent film to all 21 competition titles at Cannes this year. So in this video, we're going to be doing Distance and Monster by Hirokazu Koreeda.
One of our favorites, a true legend of Japanese cinema, Hirokazu Koreeda. I first noticed Koreeda in 2013 when there was a lot of buzz around his film Like Father, Like Son at Cannes. There was some talk at the time that it could win the Palme d'Or. Ultimately, it did not. But when I saw that film, I adored it. It is such a beautiful, moving, humanist film. And that was the first time I noticed him. He first started making films in 1995 with the film Maborosi, which premiered in Venice. And in last year's Cannes Parallel Challenge, Arnaud and I gave Koreeda our Palme d'Or for Nobody Knows, which was his 2004 film. Now, his popularity has grown and grown with Western audiences through the years. I would say his popularity culminated in 2018 with an Oscar nomination for Best International Feature, as well as a Palme d'Or win for Shoplifters. A lot of people compare his style to Yasuhiro Ozu, the old master behind films like Tokyo Story and Late Spring, but Koreeda actually hates this comparison. He much more prefers to be compared to Ken Loach, which is funny because Ken Loach is also in competition. So we decided on the film Distance from 2001 as our parallel film for Monster this year. We chose this because it was Koreeda's first film in Cannes competition, and collectively the two of us have seen all of his other Cannes competition films. This may be less critically praised in comparison to many of his other films, but we just gave this guy a Palme d'Or last year, so we can't pick another one of his, best films. We have to go with something it's a little bit of a deeper cut.
A deeper cut indeed. This isn't as well known in his filmography, but hey, we're hopefully with our video here we can bring a little bit more light to this film because I think it really deserves it. Koreeda really never misses, but this is actually really interesting within his filmography. We follow a group of characters who are all affected by a chemical attack set off by a cult 8 years prior to the events of the film. Whether it be relatives who have died or themselves being affected in some other way. These characters go to the cult's former base in the forest to grieve and, for this kind of ritualistic event. But events beyond their control forces them to stay there longer and really remember and share their stories to one another and reckon with the growing distance that they have with their memories. It really feels like this could be a setup to a really shitty horror film. I'm thinking of something like Chernobyl Diaries. Thankfully, of course, this is a Koreeda film we're talking about, so there is this kind of high concept, really kind of weird, slightly disturbing premise, but of course Koreeda is going to find a way to make it sensible again, make it human again, which is what he's best at, frankly. That's what he did with Broker.
Koreeda is a master of empathy. That's what I get out of all of his films. He often takes people in situations where they're clearly not good people, and he makes us understand them and understand their pain and what led them to this moment. It reminds me of the film Bicycle Thieves, actually, which, saying that now, I could see a lot of inspiration that he may have drawn from that film in making us empathize with the situations that lead people into being quote-unquote bad. He loves that moral gray area. And it's really interesting that this film, Distance, is a response to real life events, which happened in the 90s in Tokyo. The cult AUM, they were a doomsday cult that essentially released a toxic nerve gas in the Tokyo subway. So this film is a response to that. Many filmmakers would take a story like this and turn it into some sort of exploitative action movie, or like you said, a horror movie, but in Koreeda's hands, it's a pretty sensitive look at grief. It's not dealing with the actual cult members in this, but it's looking at how does an event like this impact our relationship with our memories? How can we reconcile the pain that someone that we loved may have caused? And that's where this film is really interesting. It exists in that moral gray area like so much of Koreeda's films really do.
It's also really interesting on a formal level. I mean, this film was released in 2001. This is not too long after the creation of the Danish movement Dogma 95, and if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's a movement that essentially tries to de-emphasize Hollywood or studio film techniques in order for using more amateur techniques. You can really feel it. I don't actually know if Kore-eda would say that this was inspired by that, but I suspect it is. We know Kore-eda's style, and this feels very, very different from it. In that he's very open to moving the camera around. It feels very much more dynamic. The colors are very, very vivid. It's really a different experience.
I mentioned earlier that Kore-eda is often compared to Yasuhiro Ozu, and I would say that's less because of the type of film they make and more because of the way that they typically shoot films. Ozu is very famous for shooting films at knee level, on tripods, just locked down, letting you observe the scene. And Kore-eda often does the same. And so distance is very different because it's the most movement you will ever see in a Kore-eda film. The camera is dynamic, it's really moving at all times, it's a very lo-fi look to it. It seems to be very early digital, possibly. We're just in the forest with a camera, no lighting design there. It's all very natural. It's all captured as is.
This is a really, really beautiful film, very layered film thematically. I was fascinated just watching these characters, not just like walking around the woods, but like talking to each other about trying to reconcile with the past, with their possible mistakes, with trying to say goodbye to somebody they might have known, or trying to forgive people they might have known that might have been part of this. There's a lot of flashbacks in the film that I think are intercut quite creatively. I kind of wish that they were filmed in a way that was a bit different, so that's more clear when we cut back and forth from them. But I think the way they are intercut for the story actually works quite a bit and gives a lot more depth to the story, personally.
I half and half disagree with you, because I agree that I think that they should have been differentiated a little bit more. I don't quite agree that they work in the intercutting of this film. I actually think that this is why this is a little bit lower than some of Kore-eda's best work. I'm not entirely sure the flashbacks really feel as though they're natural within the story. I think that this film is at its best, like you said, when we're watching these characters walking around the woods, trying to figure out how to get back to Tokyo as they're stranded. I don't know if the cutaways, the flashbacks really add to that scenario. Something interesting to note, this is very early Kore-eda. Typically, Kore-eda's films don't really have much of a concept to pull you in. With something like Broker, it's about found families, very hard to describe. Shoplifters, the same thing. Monster, which is coming this year, also looks very similar. The Truth, all of them are very small stories where the characters are what make the film. But this film and his earlier film, Afterlife, actually are both very interesting because they're very high concept films. This one being about a cult, same with Afterlife, being about people coming together after they have passed away to build the memory that they want to live in for the rest of eternity. Big, high concept ideas, and that's not where Kore-eda works anymore.
Yeah, even if this isn't one of Kore-eda's best films, I would say for any Kore-eda fan, you have to seek this one out just because it really stands out on a stylistic and narrative level. So it's really worth taking a look to really get a full sense of Kore-eda's work up until now. But let's talk about Monster, this new film that will premiere, the very first film that will be playing from the Cannes competition. Crazy that Kore-eda already has a new film, even though we had Broker last year, right?
It seems crazy, but he does this thing all the time. He is a very prolific filmmaker. He made a film every single year between 2015 to 2019. I think why this feels different is because it's very rare that he has two competition films back to back, year to year. From 2015 to 2019, he only had two films in competition, in 2015 and 2018. So we don't often see a filmmaker get films year after year into Cannes competition. I think that's why it feels weird.
Either way, this new film, Monster, it seems to be, from what I gather, a mystery, kind of social thriller, a la Kore-eda, of course. Haven't seen The Third Murder, which is one of his films, I think, from 2017.
Yes.
But it really does seem like it's in that vein. Like he's taking a story that on its surface is a thriller, but he's making it in his sauce, I guess.
But in his sauce, in that special Kore-eda sauce.
I'm trying to translate a French expression and it's not working. So there seems to be a mystery around a young boy's behavior that may be linked to things happening at school. To be honest, the trailer didn't hook me that much, didn't give me too many clues as to what this film is about. It didn't particularly like seem like one of his greatest, most craziest, epicest films. I don't know. What did you think?
I also didn't get a ton out of that trailer. I don't know what to think about this film. I mean, Kore-eda's films are very hard to capture in the medium of a trailer because, like I said, most of them are very low concept. Outside of Distance and Afterlife, it would be very hard to sell a Kore-eda film as an idea. I don't really know what to expect out of Monster, but that said, I wasn't a huge fan of Broker. I didn't dislike it. I was just kind of mid on it. This kind of feels along the same vein. It seems a little bit minor. I always have high hopes for a Kore-eda film, but that said, this one, I don't know what to think.
I would be surprised if this walks away with a prize based on what we know. I'm not currently predicting to get anything, but you know, we'll wait until reactions. We'll see. Maybe that'll change our opinion around.
Broker did walk away with a prize last year, but I don't think that means Kore-eda always has to walk away with a prize. You know, if anything, it means that this film is more likely not to because last year he did. But again, we'll wait for the reactions. They should come out like a few hours after we release this video, so we'll know if Monster truly is another masterpiece by the maestro Hirokazu Koreeda. Definitely check out Distance. This is a really, really strong, very underrated film, underappreciated film. And thank you so much for joining us on our Cannes Parallel Challenge. Make sure you follow along to see who will walk away with our Palme d'Or.